Hi, this is an introduction about Turbo CSS, which is a compiled CSS language, and Turbo UI, which is a CSS framework like Bootstrap that is built on top of Turbo CSS. Let's dive in. This is the Turbo CSS documentation. It is under boomla.com because Turbo CSS was originally created for the Boomla website builder and application platform. The big idea behind Turbo is that all you write is HTML classes, and then the Turbo compiler will pick them up and generate the CSS for you. Let's see an example in the Turbo playground. Here's a little Hello World div with the preview above. Let's use font 96. You can see the generated CSS on the right. Let's use a blue background with BGC blue. Let's use color white and text center. As you can see, the CSS gets automatically generated. These utility classes are like functions. For example, font 96 calls the font function with the argument 96. We could use 97, a different unit, or even fractions. What classes are available? Let me go to Turbo CSS, Utilities, and here you can see about 100 classes or functions if you want, that are all the CSS properties available in Turbo, like display, margin, padding, or width. They are all defined as functions within Turbo CSS. For example, the width utility works by writing a W, dash, and then a value, which can be one of these keywords, or a length percentage value, with a simple number, or one with a unit. Most utilities have a default unit to help writing less. Every utility class documentation contains a syntax section, a parameters section, examples, and lots of specification test cases. That's because Turbo CSS is a specification first with several language-specific implementations. Right now there are two implementations, one in JavaScript and one in Go. Every compiler implementation must implement all these test cases to ensure they are compliant. All these utility classes can be used together with various selectors to only apply them when certain conditions are met. For example, we can use the viewport width selector to create responsive designs. Let's set the mobile font size first and then work our way up. Let's use a mobile font size of 48. Then on mobile landscape, which is V6, that stands for a viewport width of 640 pixels and higher, we are going to use V6 colon font 64. Note the use of the V6 prefix. Finally, on desktop screens, let's bump it up to font 128. You can see the generated CSS on the right if you're interested. As we click through the various screen sizes, you can see we have created a responsive design. The viewport selector is not the only selector. There are device selectors, DOM structure-based selectors, like the first selector, is only applied when the element is the first child within its parent. There are interaction selectors. For example, hover is only applied when the element is hovered. There are state selectors, like valid and invalid can be used for input fields. There are pseudo element selectors, like you can use the placeholder selector for changing the placeholder color of input fields. Use the selection selector for setting the background color of any selected text. Use the before and after pseudo element selectors for adding custom effects like this line here. You can even apply transitions to them. And we have tags, which I'm not going to cover here. Finally, we have combinators. Combinators allow you to only apply styles to an element if another surrounding element meets certain conditions. Let's see an example for the child combinator. We have this element with the blue background. To change its background color to red when it's hovered, we can use hover : BGC red. Now, to make our element visually respond to hovering its parent instead, that is the gray box around it, we can simply add a slash after hover, which is the child combinator. Let's see the generated CSS. Make the background color red when the current element is the child of another being hovered. The next sibling combinator applies styles to an element if its previous sibling meets certain conditions. The after sibling combinator applies to multiple elements. The descendant combinator applies if any of the element's ancestors meet certain conditions. It is typically used together with the self-selector. The self-selector allows you to apply styles to other elements. For example, to make all these 5 boxes blue, you can either paste the styles in every single one of them, or you can use the self-selector together with the child combinator to style all of them at once. Another powerful use case is to use the self-selector with the descendant combinator. For example, we can use it to set the color of all the anchors within a paragraph to blue. This feature is essential when you don't directly control the HTML, for example, when using an embedded WYSIWYG editor. So much about Turbo CSS. Let's talk about Turbo UI. Turbo UI is a CSS framework built on Turbo CSS. Why another CSS framework? Well, I wanted to create templates for Boomla. Let me show you. Like these. To create high-quality templates, I needed a high-quality design system. What is a design system? Well, at the core, it's pretty much a collection of colors, fonts, button styles, interaction effects, and higher-level examples composed of them. So, I first tried to create a design system using designer software. I was moving really fast at first, but I got exponentially slower. So, I figured this is not going to scale. Then I looked at programming tools like SAS, Less, and the others, only to find their feature sets way too limited for my use case. They were not expressive enough. Let me show you an example with Turbo UI that you can't do with other CSS frameworks. Here's a button. Let's say it's perfect on desktop, but we needed bigger buttons on mobile. I wanted to be able to use Turbo UI classes with conditional selectors just like any of the other Turbo CSS classes, which means that we could be able to use large buttons on mobile and medium buttons on desktop using v12 colon u1.button-m. Well, it's now a reality. We could even use a different style on desktop. v12 colon u1.button-danger. Turbo UI defines this U1 namespace containing about 150 classes. Some for text, like headings, display, etc., button styles, input styles, select, checkbox, radio, text area, range, some fonts, and a text container. This list of classes is considered an API. There is also a default theme implementing this API, which is effectively assigning styles to those classes. The default theme is about 700 lines long, and you can use it on your own projects if you choose to. On turboui.boomla.com, let's go to CSS Elements, then Buttons. Here you can see Turbo UI examples using the default theme. You can display code snippets and copy them to your own projects. Let me click around to give you an idea. There are examples for buttons, input fields, select, checkbox, radio, file uploads, text area, range, and some input groups. These are base elements of Turbo UI. It also offers higher level components, like some layouts, page layouts, grid examples, various containers, and so on. There are inner blocks, which go into an existing page layout like text, images, lists, icons, and tables. Again, you can copy-paste these as well. Finally, there are some full width blocks, which take up the full width of the page. The number of these snippets is expected to grow over time, as I will be preparing the HTML snippets here before implementing functional apps for Boomla. So Turbo UI uses this U1 prefix. One question I get is whether this is valid. It is, you just need to escape it in CSS. The benefit of using this U1 prefix is that we can now evolve the Turbo UI CSS framework separately from the language. It is also not conflicting with your own CSS classes. You can also write libraries. Although you can define classes without a prefix, it is recommended that you use them. This helps documenting your codebase. For example, you could create an effects library with a bounce class. The class name effects.bounce will make it obvious that the bounce class comes from the effects library. You know where it's defined, you know where to find its code. It's also obvious where to create new ones. It also goes the other way. If you are editing the effects library and see that there's a bounce class, it is easy to figure out whether it's used in your codebase or not by simply searching for effects.bounce. It also helps with evolving the codebase. Instead of rewriting the effects library, it's better to create a new effects2 library and migrate your codebase to using that instead. That way, your codebase will remain functional throughout the change. Here's an example library. It starts with the T1 keyword, which defines it shall be compiled by Turbo CSS version 1. Classes you define are first-class citizens, they are fully composable. You can embed them in other class definitions of your own. You can apply responsive selectors to them. Today, we have the U1 library defined. In the future, we will have U2, U3, and so on. This is a reserved namespace. It is effectively the standard library of Turbo CSS. The APIs of Turbo CSS and Turbo UI have no config options. As a result, Turbo-based code snippets can be copy-pasted across projects. Let me emphasize, I'm not saying that you cannot configure the exact color of red. I'm saying that the variable is always defined, so using the class color red will always work. Other CSS frameworks will give you a list of predefined values like v4, but it is up to your configs if v4 is actually defined on your project or not. Turbo optimizes for portability. Finally, let me show you how this plays with Boomla, how Boomla makes it really easy to use Turbo CSS when creating a website. First, log in and clone a template. Done, it is live. If we open the new tab, you will see that the uikit.boomla.net package is installed. It contains building blocks you can use without writing code. This entire template was made of those building blocks. To use Turbo CSS code snippets, the easiest way is to install the uikit code package. Install on this website. Done. This package contains building blocks similar to those in the Turbo UI component library. For example, let's create an icon. To edit this icon, you would right-click it, memorize its name, code 4, and then click Show in IDE. Then you will find the file by its name and open its file body. You will see the Turbo CSS code here, which you can tweak to your needs. For example, you could change the fill color and background color of the icon. For comparison, to edit the icon from the no-code UI kit, you would right-click it, click Settings, and customize it. You can also pick a different icon from the provided set. On the other hand, to change the icon in the code-based equivalent, you would have to replace the SVG code itself. To summarize, the no-code elements are easier and faster to work with, while the code-based elements give you more flexibility. Some elements only exist in one or the other. For example, there is no table element in the no-code UI kit, but there is one in the UIKit code package. To edit the table, you have to edit the code directly. Note that you can use the drag and drop functionality, copy paste, undo redo, and so on, even when using the code-based elements. Not only can you drop code-based elements into no-code ones, but also the other way around. Let's use a grid element from the UIKit code package. You will be able to drop elements into the available columns just as before. Looking under the hood, you will find a .buckets file defining the buckets. As for the code, this line finds all the files in the bucket named col1 and then inlines them. The semicolon is used to end the Turbo CSS code block. Then the O1 placeholder class together with the data O1 placeholder attribute mark this DOM element droppable while routing any dropped files into the col1 bucket. Finally, you can also copy-paste code snippets from the Turbo UI component library if you want to. Let's go back to our table. And paste it here. Thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed it.